Have you ever thrown something away and found yourself regretting that decision later? We sometimes throw stuff away because we don't care if we ever see it again, or we may not realize the value of it in the moment. Of course, sometimes it's a complete accident.
Oh, måste vi det göra med akşam
One time, I was in high school and had to write this 6-page research paper. The normal length for my classes at that time were like 1 to 2 pages, not a big deal. Of course, at the time, I thought it was a big deal. But then I realized when I got to college, the average length was like 10. So I would have loved to have gone back to like a 1 to 2 page paper. But anyway, I had to do a 6 whole pages of a research paper on this super complicated military book that if I didn't take notes on literally every single page, I would have been lost. And I had written this beautiful, flawless paper that I for sure thought that my teacher was going to frame when she had saw it. Unfortunately, I had crafted it on an old as dirt computer, and I mean, this thing was old and temperamental. It was a straight dinosaur. Sometimes it would just die randomly, or it would jump around on different tabs of a page. So this paper somehow, quite literally, deleted itself right before my eyes. I had never saved it, and the computer had begun to restart. So 6 pages of what seemed like an eternity of my time, my pride and joy, which I surely thought was the best paper that I had ever created, was gone, literally in a second. I cried, freaked out, and then panicked. Of course, my only option was to do it again, and it was not nearly as flawless as the original. It was a half-done paper that I basically did enough just not to get a 0, and I had lost it. Sometimes losing things is funny, like the girl's phone. Well, maybe like not right when it happened, but years later, I'm sure she's laughing now. Bet all you can do in that situation. But sometimes it's anything but funny. Maybe you lost something sentimental to you, or maybe you broke something that wasn't yours. Maybe you lost something and knew that you were going to get in trouble because of it. It's difficult to lose something that really matters to you, but it's even worse when you know that it's your fault that it's gone. You might feel sadness, guilt, embarrassment, anger, or maybe even shame. You might try to keep it a secret because you're afraid of what others are going to say. Or maybe you just try to move on because remembering what you lost was just too upsetting. I'm sure all of us have experienced at least one of these. Over the last couple weeks, we've been talking about things that were lost and are now found again. Specifically, we've been talking about what we do when we feel lost, because sometimes we feel lost because we don't feel noticed or seen, we don't feel valuable, or we know we've messed up and we just aren't quite sure how to fix it. When the shutdown happened last year, I was in a funk. I got home from my honeymoon and lockdown hit about a month later. Our apartment was about 30 to 50 minutes away from either sides of our family, which is a big deal for me because my family is a tight-knit unit that stays pretty close. I started a new full-time job, and I was just trying to figure out a completely new life routine with someone else. Learning how to do life with a spouse, which is fun, don't get me wrong, but it was a challenge. Little things you learn about people when you are literally stuck in an 800 square foot apartment. Myself being extremely extroverted while stuck in our tiny apartment consistently was super hard for me. I was literally distant from everyone. My family, my friends, and it put me into a state that made me feel distant from most. I felt like all I was doing was going to bed, waking up, opening Zoom, and just going through the motions. I felt like I wasn't giving any time for God, my spiritual health, or my friendships. I wasn't really trying to keep up with my relationship with my friends that well. I would send a text here and there, but I was not going to go out of my way to overcome the circumstances that came with this pandemic. I also let my work suffer too. I put myself into a box and sealed it up and just wrapped a bunch of tape and bubble wrap around it and kind of just waited for something to happen. I don't know if you have a story exactly like mine, but I'm guessing you can relate in some way. somehow you felt disconnected. Maybe because you did something to create distance between you and someone you love. Or maybe you feel distant from God, either because of your choices or because you've never really been close to God before. You made a mistake that ruined everything, and you just wish that things could go back to how they used to be. Throughout this series, we are looking at just one chapter of the Bible, just one, Luke 15. This chapter recounts a series of stories that Jesus once told about things that were lost and then found. These stories aren't historical. These are called parables, which are stories that Jesus made up in order to teach an important truth. Jesus told these stories to the Pharisees, who were religious leaders who had become arrogant, self-righteous, and dismissive of people who they believed were sinful. Jesus told these set of stories to help the Pharisees see how wrong they were about themselves, others, and God. So here's a quick recap of the stories that we have covered so far. First, Jesus told a story about a lost sheep to show the Pharisees that God isn't angry or judgmental when we wander away. Instead, God finds us and carries us back lovingly to safety. Next, Jesus told a story about a woman who lost her coin to show the Pharisees that God doesn't give up on us when we wander away. Instead, God values and keeps looking for us. And today, we're going to hear the story of a young man who lost everything because of his mistakes. We're going to start this third story in Luke 15, verses 11 through 19. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he had began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" After reading that story, I think we can probably all find things that we have in common with the prodigal son. Some may be more obvious than others, but some maybe not so much. He was impulsive, hurtful, selfish. And I'm going to break this down. He was impulsive. He made a drastic decision, apparently without getting any guidance or wisdom from others. He was hurtful. He may not have meant it this way, but his actions and words hurt his dad. Now, it doesn't explicitly say this in the Bible, but it seems to imply that asking for his inheritance early, it's like he was saying, "Dad, you're worth more to me dead than alive. Give me that money so that I don't have to depend on you and don't have to have a relationship with you anymore." And he was selfish. By not stopping to reflect on his actions, he was being hurtful to his family, and the son was acting selfishly. He cared only about his money and his big adventure, and not the people who loved him. Even though the son had safety, food, and money at home, he was dreaming about going to this distant land where he imagined he could have traveled, bought whatever he wanted, and tried to find what he thought that he was missing at home. The son was living what he thought was the dream until it all came crashing down. There was a famine, people lost their jobs, he struggled to find food, he worked for a pig farmer, and he ate the slop that the pigs ate. Now here's an important thing that we miss if we don't stop and try to understand the context of this story. Remember, Jesus was telling this story to the Pharisees, these religious leaders who saw pigs as unclean animals forbidden by God. So while you might feel compassion for the son in the stories, the Pharisees would have likely felt disgust. Although the son is not real, but if he was, he would be considered at rock bottom. He had thrown away everything that had been good in his life. He had lost his family, his money, his livelihood, and maybe even his faith. Because of his own bad decisions, he found himself disconnected from others and from God. He was probably filled with shame for what he had done and fear for what he needed to do next. The son had hit rock bottom. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Could you imagine a welcome like that? Thinking you were going to walk into a pit of disappointment, but you ended up having a party? After wasting his money, disgracing his father, bringing shame on himself and his family, his father was still filled with love and compassion for him. The father runs to his son and hugs and kisses him. And remember that Jesus told this story to help us discover something important about who God is and what God is calling you to do. God will never give up on you, even though you make mistakes and run away, maybe quite literally like the prodigal son. He welcomes you back. He does it joyfully, and this is what the whole series is about. Like the father in Jesus' parable, God is kind, loving, and patient with us. God isn't some angry old man waiting to throw lightning bolts at us when we mess up and stray. God is the loving Father, always ready to welcome us home. And Jesus is God. So when you have to make a decision or mistakes that have led you far from God, I hope you'll remember what the son in this story discovered about his father. When you feel lost, Jesus welcomes you back. When you feel lost, Jesus always welcomes you back.